Good evening. In the blessing of God's good creation, welcome to Canadian Mennonite University for a face-to-face event entitled, Who Cares? The Elderly Among Us. It's a joy to share with all of you tonight in this conversation. My name is Cheryl Pauls and I serve as CMU president. In this time of COVID-19, we meet face-to-face in virtual form as we learn together what it is to honor and share in the lives and the insights of the older adults among us. We gather in the presence of a God of extravagant mercy at a time in the path of a global pandemic and of a Lenten journey when we are tuned in to the fragility of all who are hurting, of all who are weary, when we are tuned in to the frailty of life itself. At this time and always, may we share sorrow and longing and come together with laughter and with joy. At this time and always, CMU is honored to live and learn on the ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Dakota First Peoples and the homeland of the Métis Nation. We are grateful for their stewardship of land and of water and for their hospitality, gifts that enable us to live and learn and work and rest and play and serve God the Creator in this place. As we partake in these gifts, we commit to respect for the 1871 Covenant of Treaty 1, a call to sustain the goodness of these lands and of all peoples and creatures. CMU's Face-to-Face series engages timely yet long-standing matters, not from a posture of positions or sides, but from diverse starting places and vantage points. Tonight, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Heather Campbell-Enns as this evening's host. Heather is CMU Assistant Professor of Psychology and is well suited to host this panel. Her research focuses on how we as a society care for people who are aging and also for the well-being of the family caregivers and the quality of healthcare, home care, and housing that shapes how life goes. Heather will introduce tonight's guest panelists. Welcome, Heather, and welcome all. Blessings.
Thank you, Cheryl. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our face-to-face conversation about elder care. And as Cheryl said, I'm Heather Campbell-Enns. I'm just very pleased to be with you this evening. This evening, we will focus on the experience of aging in the current context and how we care for older adults in society today. And tonight we will talk about the cracks we see in our care systems, places where care is uneven or where gaps exist. And we're looking to name these cracks as best we can and share experiences of seeing these cracks, maybe feeling them and how we navigate our way around them. And when we talk about care, we know care can mean many different things, and our conversation is open to all of these, from formal care to unpaid care, from physical care to emotional, social, and spiritual care. And here, when we talk about we, this is also open to all kinds of meanings. We might or might not be about formalized care, but as Canadians, if we don't even work or live being touched by formal care, we are still part of the society that influences it. So we could also then be referred to as citizens, neighbors who care for others, family members who care for others, and more. So our meanings are quite open. The timing of this conversation has been prompted by the COVID-19 pandemic. This pandemic has revealed many challenges in providing elder care within formal systems and informal ones. This is not new to the pandemic, as care has shifted increasingly from the community toward care that is more institutionalized and medicalized, and in some senses, at times more privatized. We have seen challenges arise. We also see that problems created by the lack of federal strategies for elder care in Canada, these can create uneven care across the nation. And at the same time, provincial formal systems have concentrated on the protection of older adults, protections that we generally are very happy to have in place. But during this pandemic, we see illness and death disproportionately impacting older adults in both community and institutional settings. When protection of our elders has been a goal, this reality we are experiencing can be very disorienting. And we wonder, how did we get here? And we rethink the systems that we as a society have put in place over a fairly long period of time. Aside from these larger systemic challenges, the pandemic has thrown families into providing informal care in ways that we did not imagine before. We are wrestling with needing to care for each other without sharing touch or without sharing the same air. Further, where families were key in connecting seniors to the community, the isolation experienced by older adults, even before 2020, has been exacerbated in this pandemic. Very little in how we are caring for each other right now has felt very normal or very natural to us, and this is distressing. So here I've mentioned feelings of disorientation and distress when it comes to caring for older adults. And while I acknowledge this despair, at the same time, I want to say that there are ways this pandemic has moved me toward hope. And here are a few reasons to have hope I want to share with you related to things that I've been paying attention to. First, I'd say that we have seen our formal systems of care shifting very quickly, more quickly than we've ever experienced before. This is with great effort and strain, but these systems are more fluid than we had imagined. There are more national conversations than ever about elder care, and this makes me wonder what we should be imagining for the future. I'll also mention what I see in faith groups. They have shifted how they operate. So we have changed how we sit together, how we serve and receive communion, how we dedicate our babies, how we marry and baptize, and how we mourn and how we bury the dead. And what spiritual care looks like and spiritual support looks like is in flux right now, and it's quite imperfect, but I observe grace being extended and faith groups revising old ways of doing things to try to meet the needs of elders. So I wonder, what does this pandemic reveal to us about spiritual care, the care we were providing to and with elders, and how might this care change in the future? And the last bit of hope I want to mention is that young people have filled me with hope. Children and youth and young adults have changed their lives during this pandemic because they understand their actions impact the lives of older generations. While we might be separated by distance, young people are noticing elderly folks more than ever before, and they are changing their behaviors as a way to care for older adults. Of course, some behavior changes were legislated, but young people have shown their devotion to seniors during the past year by altering their lives at great cost, in a part to keep seniors well. To me, this has been one of the most beautiful societal shifts I have witnessed this year, with young people being a key part in this movement toward a shared and collective way of caring for each other. I do not know what this means for our future, but it sure feels very hopeful. Our panelists today will name some of the ways care provision has been challenged by the pandemic, as well as notes about care before 2020. We invite their voices. We need to listen as we ready ourselves to start a conversation and grow our thinking in this area. We will proceed with remarks by our panelists, and then there will be a time of question and answer. Please submit your questions online so I can ask those questions on your behalf. You will find the form for the question on the CMU webpage for Face2Face. And we know there is an audience for this conversation, and we thank you for giving of your time to share this online space with us. This evening, we are pleased to be joined by representatives of healthcare, rural and urban residing seniors, and Indigenous elders. First this evening, we will hear from Gary Ledoux, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the Pathania Group in Winnipeg. The Pathania Group manages 2 personal care homes, Pathania Mennonite Personal Care Home and Pembina Place Mennonite Personal Care Home. For those of you living outside of Manitoba, personal care homes are our highest level of care for seniors outside of hospitals. It is the same as residential long-term care in other provinces, or what we used to call nursing homes. I know personal care homes means other things in other provinces, so I wanted to mention that. Besides these homes, Pathania Group also manages a memorial foundation as well as several independent and supportive housing options for seniors. Gary has a background in health promotion programs for seniors, including work with Health Canada and the Public Health Agency of Canada. These positions included significant public health work during past epidemics, no doubt informing Gary's work today. Second, and after Gary, we are joined by Walter Wiebe. Walter resides in Morden and is a member of Morden Mennonite Church. He has worked as a social worker and community mental health worker in the past, and Walter has many significant church and volunteer involvements in his community and surrounding area. We are also joined by Barbara and Clarence Nepinak. Barbara and Clarence are Indigenous elders and members of Pine Creek First Nation. They are both retired from public service, and they are very busy in advisory council work and board work, as well as many ways they provide elder and cultural teachings and Ojibwe language instruction. Barbara and Clarence have been recognized by several honors and awards, including the Order of Manitoba. We consider it to be an honor that you have agreed to bring your knowledge to us this evening. And last, we're joined by Rosalie Lepke. Rosalie lives in Winnipeg and is a member of Hope Mennonite Church in the West Broadway neighborhood of Winnipeg. Rosalie is a registered nurse who trained as a chaplain and worked for several decades as a chaplain in personal care homes. Since her retirement, Rosalie continues to lead a very active life. She enjoys being outdoors as well as connecting with her family and friends. Rosalie continues her interest in bringing together and supporting the spiritual, physical, and emotional needs of other people. Rosalie's joining us from an office here at CMU, and the others are joining us from their homes this evening. The panelists will share their remarks in the order that I introduced them. And panelists, if you do not mind, I will let you know when you're reaching your time allotted, although it's just a guideline and not a rule, and feel free to finish sharing what you're intending to share. After the panelists have shared their remarks, we will take time to answer questions that we receive from the audience. So Gary, let's begin with you.
Thank you, Heather. I'm really pleased to be part of this CMU forum and to be in the company of such remarkable fellow panelists. I will up front give a disclaimer in that my remarks and my comments may not be the official position of the Bethania Group and are based on my personal experiences, analysis, and observations, and therefore are also not universal to all personal care homes. I was asked when discussing this forum to share what I've learned about the impact of the pandemic in relation to our residents, staff, families, and the current system of care in personal care homes. And to do this in 8 minutes, I will try to stay on time, Heather, I promise. I'll start with a brief background. As you may know, 37 Winnipeg personal care homes had at least one resident and one positive staff case. Starting in September and continuing until early January, there were significant resident outbreaks in multiple homes, resulting in many resident deaths. In fact, of the 886 COVID-related deaths to date in the province, 344, or about 39%, were in Winnipeg personal care homes. In our particular case, we had 3 staff test positive at Pembina Place between October and November, and thankfully all recovered. And fortunately, we've been able to prevent any COVID transmission to our residents. At Bethania, it's a different story. At the start of November, we had 2 resident and 1 staff case. We activated our full outbreak plan, closed off all 7 wings, and isolated the 2 residents in our separate COVID care and recovery room. Despite all these measures, which included screening all staff every day and consistent resident testing, we had resident outbreaks on 2 other wings between November and December. We were able to contain these outbreaks to those wings. However, by the time we declared our outbreak over at the start of February, 33 residents had contracted COVID, 12 passed away, and 11 recovered. Back in March, all the in-person visitations to Bethania was stopped by public health and all personal care homes. Then, we were allowed to have family outdoor visits in June, indoor visits in July, and on August 4th, Shared Health announced we could have 2 family members visit residents in their rooms. As with most personal care homes, family is incredibly important to the health and well-being of our residents. Sadly, all these visits, except the virtual online ones, ended in early November when we experienced our first cases and were declared in official outbreak status. Therefore, families were not able to have any type of in-person visits for March, April, and May, and then again from November to January 11th. Indoor visits were able to resume on January 11th, and our in-room visits for designated family members started on February 22nd of this week, as the risk of transmission is now quite low due to the mass vaccinations of our residents in early February. The impact of the family restrictions and resident isolation on units and the anxiety and fear of outbreak took its toll on many residents, family, and staff at Bethania. Some residents accepted the upheaval in stride either because they could understand what was happening or sadly were not sufficiently cognitively intact to be aware. Some became more anxious and depressed without family present, or confused and angry at being isolated on their wings and often in their rooms for long periods of time. Many residents missed the socialization of being with other residents in common areas, in dining rooms, at church services, and being able to move about the facility. During our lockdowns, having virtual online conversations with family helped many residents cope, but proved ineffective for others with dementia, for example. Group recreation activities ended, and our few recreation staff were hard-pressed to do one-to-one activities with 148 residents. For some, boredom became routine. There were nevertheless also moments of joy and celebration for residents that we cannot forget. Family visits were uplifting, and gifts and other packages most welcome. Staff tried to keep the tradition of celebrating birthdays and interacting wherever possible to keep their spirits up. Our chaplain played an incredibly major role in providing spiritual care and comfort, including for those in our COVID care and recovery room. And as you know, Bethania, as a Mennonite Christian organization, takes spiritual care as an equal value as healthcare. While very hard to quantify, we can be certain that the hard measures taken to prevent COVID transmission affected the psychological, emotional, and physical health and well-being of some residents, and may have lasting negative effects. Staff impacts varied. From March to August, there was a lot of anxiety because there were a lot of unknowns. Then in September, when PCH outbreaks began, there was widespread fear among many staff. My senior managers and I had been working 75 hours or more a week since March, and then for 40 or 50 or more days in a row during the outbreak. My director of care, for example, worked over 65 days straight without a break. By early December, most of us were physically and emotionally exhausted and remained so. Our dietary, our nursing, our healthcare, recreation, and admin staff took on new roles and had to adapt to multiple infection control act directives, which sometimes were contradictory. Keeping up the minimum number of staff for all shifts was extremely challenging, which I'll note a little bit more later. We do thank God that the vast majority of our staff rose to this enormous challenge, despite their own fears and their own anxiety. People pitched in where they were needed and worked together hours longer if needed. Our doctors were also front and center and continued providing first-class care despite the restrictions. Perhaps the most wonderful but not surprising outcome was the care and love demonstrated by our staff, holding residents' hands, taking the time to talk at length, even though busy beyond reason, reassuring them, celebrating the return of residents from the COVID care and recovery room, and providing the best care possible. As with residents, however, the long-term negative effects on staff physical and mental health are hard to predict. I fear we will see many diagnoses of PTSD and an increase in serious health conditions such as hypertension and cardiovascular disease. Family reactions are also varied as would be expected. In general, families are very concerned about the health of their loved ones and the effect that visiting restrictions and unit isolation was having. Most expressed support and understanding while they grieved the loss of contact. Others became depressed, and a very few became angry and made us the target of their anger. We did, however, receive many thoughtful letters and emails, and many families provided gift cards to express their appreciation for our staff. When able to visit outdoor, indoor, or in the rooms, families demonstrated the joy of being close again to their loved ones, and we're thankful for the opportunities. Having compassionate and end-of-life visits in the facility were also very important to families when we were locked down. As a faith community-based and supported organization, the visiting restrictions also affected our supportive church members and pastors, and the volunteers who normally provide an enormous amount of care and support for our residents, and they were sorely missed. I spent a great deal of time preparing communiques and emails and letters to families to keep them updated on emerging issues or new directives. Communication was a critical element to keep families up to speed. At times, we had to deliver bad news, but transparency and honesty were values important to demonstrate as a Christian organization. For many families, a COVID fatigue set in, and they became despondent or fearful and more worried about the long-term effects of the shutdown. Again, it's very hard to predict the lasting effect on families, especially for those who lost a loved one during the outbreak, and for all of those who are not able to spend as much time together as usual. The last topic is about the current system for care and personal care homes, as I understand the question, in relation to the pandemic. This is an incredibly complex topic to cover and worthy of its own forum. So for the few seconds I have left, I'm looking at Heather. I will have only to list 3 things that I think are very important and affected our capacity to provide quality care and prevent widespread transmission. I must stress this is not a criticism of government, the Health Incident Command Group, Shared Health, or the WRHA. It's only a reflection of our experience. The first challenge was that our existing infection prevention and control plan required significant revision to evolve into our pandemic outbreak plan, and it keeps evolving. It was very difficult to keep up with all the new evidence, best practices, and directions that were emerging virtually on a daily basis from different sources, and then to try and implement them. Also, the daily or weekly demands for reports and templates and other data was difficult to provide on time and took valuable time away from more important activities. Secondly, maintaining staff levels was extremely difficult week after week and day after day. Some of the reasons were the single site order meant we lost care staff to other personal care homes and had to use a lot of overtime and private agency staff. There were also new tasks to develop and that were required, such as a 24/7 screening of staff and meal delivery for each resident on every wing 3 times a day, which often fell to myself, my managers, straining our ability to focus on bigger picture issues and to find some rest. Filling gaps when staff were off awaiting test results or due to sickness was often impossible given our reduced workforce. I would like to note here that if we would have had access to the rapid staff testing on site in the fall, it might have reduced the absences for staff who had to wait to hear about negative test results at home, sometimes for up to a week. Finding volunteers to staff the COVID care and recovery room that held our positive residents was often a challenge. And in fact, my director of care and resident care manager had to do shifts when we could not find anyone. Again, I feel a responsibility to remark that if the paid hours per resident per day of care were higher before the pandemic, it would have lessened some of these staffing challenges. And third and lastly, we may have been able to prevent some of the new or reoccurring outbreaks in personal care homes if the resident immunizations could have been rolled out in early December when the vaccines first arrived. I do have to acknowledge, however, that the decisions on whom to vaccinate first as a priority was a very difficult one. I know I've only scratched the surface of this issue, but I hope it provided at least a glimpse into our PCA world over the past year during the pandemic. Let's not forget the pandemic continues, but we trust in God that we are now in the beginning of the end, to quote Winston Churchill. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary, for that comprehensive view of life at your personal care homes in this time, and for the staff, very enlightening to hear some of that and get a sense of the grief and loss as well that have been experienced through the staff there and families. So thank you for that. Walter Weebsen joined us. Walter, would you mind sharing your remarks with us?
Okay. First of all, I want to commend CMU for putting this on a critical topic during this time of a pandemic, and to talk about the place of seniors in our communities. I guess the positive thing about the pandemic is the fact that it has caused us to take a closer look at what we're doing with the care of our elders. I will begin, I'm representing these, the seniors, I guess. I will begin by giving a brief overview of my journey of aging. I prefer the idea of journey rather than stage, in that the stage seems to indicate you have arrived at some place, and whereas the journey is a constant moving forward to something else. There's much talk about stages of living, anywhere from newborn, early childhood, teens, young adults, middle age, and then seniors. Each stage leads to the next. It's a preparation for the next, and it continues unless there is an early death. But when we reach the adult stage or the old age stage, what is next? That's the end. Or is it? What about afterlife? How do you prepare for that? How does one prepare for the moment when the spirit departs from the body, which has now discontinued to function and has been pronounced dead? Is death to be feared? Is there a way to prepare and actually plan for one's demise in a way which is meaningful? My aging journey started the day I was born. I arrived at the old age stage, not sure when. Was it the day I retired from my regular employment? Or when my first pension check arrived? Or the day the realization came I could no longer play street hockey with my grandsons? Or was it when I bent down to tie my shoes and then looked around to see what else I could do while I was down there? I guess that indicates it was a gradual process. It's a transition with a series of markers to remind me of the reality of becoming older. I retired from my work as mental health worker at age 60, although I had reduced my employment to a 0.8 about 5 years earlier to make space for other ventures, one of which was to volunteer at CNBC and later CMU 1 day a week with student services. I suppose now I live in a comfortable home, a condo right now. Before that was in a house until that became too much, then we moved to a condo. After retirement, we took on 2 other things. We did a turnout service with MCC in Gabriel, Alberta, where we worked with the Low German speaking people that had recently come from Mexico and other Latin American countries. We worked in the area of mental health, public health, and community development. Coming home to Morden, involvement in our faith community, Morden and the church increased in various capacities. Meaningful community involvements have graced our lives, such as the regular volunteering at MCC's thrift store and many others. We have done some traveling, which has been a real learning experience. Most of our travel has been in the form of learning tours. Along the journey of aging, a recurrent encounter was the realization of not being able to do some things anymore. Each relinquishment was a loss. And although I try to see each activity given up as an opportunity to explore something new, something less active, less demanding, the losses were real, and space for breathing these losses needed attention. Along the way, we had to modify our lifestyle by giving up our house to move to the condo, which is our present place of abode. What follows, we don't know. What does all this have to do with our topic? When I reflect on my journey of old age, I realize how good I have had it. The things that Gary described in terms of trying to care for the elders in Bethania, we were subjected to any of that. Our problems have been minimal. The biggest thing has been the separation from our loved ones, our faith community, our family, communication by Zoom is not the same as face-to-face, obviously. Life has been basically good. So my observations are from an observer of what I see around me rather than from personal experiences. Let me share a few. First of all, seniors have been deprived of family and community during the restrictions brought on by the pandemic, and have had to suffer and die alone, as Gary described. My wife and I, although isolated in part from family and friends, have had each other. Many seniors in their own homes, care homes, or other, have no one to be in their bubble, and consequently endure extreme loneliness. There was a time, and still is for some, when marriage separation was considered a horrible sin. Is the church perhaps called to find better ways to provide care than splitting up the couple? Enhanced home care? Facilities where they can be together in a context where both can reside, where care is provided to the one in need? Here's one example. The Mennonite Nursing Home in Rostern, Saskatchewan is designed to provide a range of services, mostly under one roof. My wife's parents spent the last years of their life there. When they reached the point where they could no longer manage at home, they moved to an assisted living suite in the wing of the nursing home, where they enjoyed a relatively independent lifestyle with staff support for a number of years. When Dad's health deteriorated to the point where more care was needed, he was admitted to the nursing home section, still under the same roof. During the day, he could spend time in the suite with Mother to the extent that his functioning level permitted. Staff was always available if assistance was required. When that arrangement was no longer adequate, Mother spent time with him in his room. Always, and most of the time had their meals together. She never had to leave the building to be with Dad, right until the day he died. This is but one example of what can be done, and I'm sure there's many other facilities where they have similar kinds of arrangements. Secondly, a primary need for all people, that is how God created us, is to be in community. Being surrounded by people isn't necessarily an easy fix. The individual needs to have meaningful relationships to ease their loneliness. More and more care homes are moving to modular arrangements where a resident has a smaller group to interact with. Are we creating sufficient space for the resident to have input as to which model they would like to be part of? Or is the decision made solely by the caregivers? Thirdly, Mary, not her real name, had been widowed for several years and was living independently in a seniors complex. Although opportunities for socialization were present in the complex, she wanted a relationship that was deeper. She got into a dating relationship with a widower, having lunch together, going to concerts, and many other activities. She had no intent in marrying again, but enjoyed the companionship offered in this kind of relationship. A frequent response she got from others was, "Are you going to get married again?" Makes me wonder, do we need to foster a mindset that allows greater freedom for seniors to be in relationships that don't fit into our way of thinking? How many seniors feel they need to hide their social life to avoid community introspection? Fourthly, are we allotting sufficient resources for senior care? According to Carl de Gers's column in last Saturday's Winnipeg Free Press, Canada spends 1.3% of its gross domestic product on long-term senior care. Denmark spends 2.5%, Sweden 3.2%, and the Netherlands 3.7%, almost 3 times more than Canada. What could our institutions do if they had the necessary resources to to develop better levels of care. The argument that we often hear is that we can't afford to pay more. My question is, can we afford not to pay more? Our seniors were on the forefront in building up this province with their hard work and taxes and deserve care that is dignified and respectful. Warehousing seniors has to stop. It is a form of elder abuse, I believe. Are we as faith communities called to use our insights and influence and our past history of being on the forefront of care of all kinds to put pressure on government to increase funding for senior care? The question isn't about money not being available, but about how priorities are arrived at. Fifthly, one aspect of more resources being made available is finding ways to keep seniors in their own homes longer. This would mean upgrading our home care and other services to seniors. But more than money is required. We need to nurture a mindset that sees each person as having worth and dignity beyond their ability to contribute to the economic sphere of our culture, and to respect their communities that they are part of. And the most important one is marriage, for those who are married. Sixthly, the journey of aging needs to be treated as more than waiting for the person to die. On the one hand, we want to bring as much meaning as possible to the lives of our seniors, but at the same time, death is the reality for all at some point. I propose that more needs to be done to help the senior prepare for his or her death. How do we talk to the one in their waning years about the end of life? Are we willing to walk with the person on their journey towards death? We who face letting go of the loved one are grieving. Do we realize that the dying person is grieving also? Sometimes the two grieve separately. Is there a place for encouraging joint grieving? At times, the dying person is left to grieve on their own because of our discomfort talking about it, or the fear that talking about it will be too painful. By ignoring it, we are increasing the pain, not resolving the pain. Have we given permission for the person to leave us? Is she or he free to allow their spirit to leave their body? There are times when we turn to words of comfort too soon before we allow the person to express their feelings about what they're facing at the moment. It is my belief that some persons put off their own dying because they feel they don't have the right to die, or they don't want to hurt the ones they're leaving behind. The more we can participate in the journey to death, the more the person is free to die. We have talked a lot about MAID in our communities in the last couple of years, medical assistance in dying. One of the things that's missing in that conversation is the psychological aspect of dying, the relational aspect of dying. We need to do more in that area. I think I'm going to leave it at that for now and see what the questions come out of it. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you very much, Walter. Yes, many thoughts for us to consider, including housing that's acceptable for older adults and in a way that and feasible for our communities, and thoughts about death and dying for us to consider. Thank you. Barbara and Clarence, are you ready to share your remarks with us? We look forward to hearing from you. If you can unmute yourself.
There you go.
You muted yourself again. There, I think try now.
Okay. All
yes,
right.
Great.
Well, Miigwech, thank you for inviting us to be part of this panel. I think it's important that we clarify some of the terminology that you're using as it pertains to our community. We talk about elders and we talk about seniors. Those are two entirely different groups of people. To be an elder is something that is recognized from the community. Anybody can be a senior, but not everybody can be an elder. So I'll set the record straight on that one. We are very fortunate in our family that we have our daughter living with us. In traditional times, it was always a granddaughter or somebody that lived with the seniors or the elders in the family. And that's the way it's always been. That's one of the basic teachings in our traditional oral history teachings. And like I say, we're very fortunate we have our daughter that is here to help us and to ensure that we have everything we need and what we need. And but for some of us, because we're a close-knit community, what I've done personally is reach out to some of my friends, especially the ones that are alone, that are single, that are widowed, and so forth. I've reached out to them, and then we all support each other. I probably with my close friends that I probably call about 10 of them. And so we all check on each other to make sure everybody's okay. But one of the most important things that I shared with my friend is every morning you have to have purpose. If you don't have purpose, it's not a good day. It's fine to watch TV for a little while, but there is life beyond that. And I think it's important that we always look after it, especially our community. I can only speak about our community, how we care for one another and how we reach out to one another and how we support each other. And so that's what we've done. That's what I've done personally myself. And but that's how we take care of our community and our relatives. And so Clarence is here too.
You mentioned something about a little while ago. I was gonna interrupt you, but I didn't. And about young people and how they treat. I wish somebody would go and have a talk with our grandson Damus. He comes in here. He's 4 years old, by the way, and he comes in here and he goes running all over the house till he finds Cuckoo, which is grandma. Doesn't bother with me, but he sure has a lot of energy, and he takes a lot of energy out of us, sort of, just to look after him for the short time he's with us, sort of thing. So anyway, aging. Just recently, I turned 72, and it's and Barbara looks after me. She's 3 years younger than I am, and she really looks after me really well. And sometimes I get a little antsy with that sort of thing. So I'm getting at that age where I don't take orders very well. Not that I ever did, but it's a struggle to be here. And like Barbara mentioned, we have our second daughters living with us, and it's a real bonus to have her around. She's always checking up on us and making sure that we have something to eat. And it doesn't matter what time of the morning I wake up. She'll walk in here a few minutes after I'm sitting at the table, and then she'll say, "Are you hungry?" And I say, "Yes, I'm hungry." So she'll make me breakfast, sort of thing. So, and other times I just say, "Just cereal, that's all." And but she'll do the eggs and everything else sort of thing. So it's a way that in our tradition, we like Barbara mentioned, it was always a granddaughter that lived with us, and the granddaughter was passed to the grandparents. If she went when the granddaughter was about 10 or 12, she'd move in with grandma and grandpa, and she would live with them. And I remember this myself, like my couple of my cousins, would go and live with our grandparents, and they would be with them for years, to be with our grandparents, some effort to make sure that they were taken care of, sort of thing. So, really.
But we do know where the resources are out there that individuals can access, not just ourselves as Indigenous people, but there are organizations. I sit on the board of directors for Aging Opportunity, and they provide a lot of good services to people. And but it's also up to the individual if they need that kind of help to reach out to them and to be able to inquire what services there are available. And they do have numerous. I just recently got appointed there, so I'm just still educating myself on that. But I know that that service is there for others. It's there for us as well if we were to need it. And also in our First Nations community here in the urban area, just talking about that vaccine and having access to it. I mean, our great leader, Pallister, has indicated that preference was given to First Nations and so forth, and there was like a priority system. And on that system in our community, there was specifically there was like age requirements, and there was also, you have to be an elder or a knowledge keeper or a wisdom keeper. That's what was outlined in the criteria for us to be able to access that vaccine. So we were eligible for that. And so now we're just waiting for that second vaccination. And we took it, and because of Clarence's health issues, and I don't really have any health issues, but as a care provider, I have a responsibility, and so we did that. But it's important for us individuals, not just Indigenous people. It's important that we know what services are available out there that can assist us in our everyday lives, and not to take advantage of it, but to be able to use it on a temporary basis if need be, or to refer somebody to those services. I know there is some of the Aboriginal organizations had some meetings, but we did not attend any of those meetings. And most of the time, we have been home a majority of the time. And what we would do is, if we had to go out, actually our daughter did a lot of the shopping, the groceries, but we would go out for a drive out in the country just to get out of the house. And also, when it was a little bit more safely within the last month, we took the liberty of, if we had to do errands, specific errands, we would line them all up for the one day. And then we would just take our first stop and go to the first, and then I would go inside the building, wherever it is. Sometimes to just stay in the vehicle. But I found that it was so tiring to do that because we were lumping 4 or 5 errands all in one day. But we were trying to maximize our time that we had to be out. And but now that things are starting to change, and just the other day we had gone out to a restaurant and it just felt so different. We sat in a restaurant and I think we ate out 3 times since then, but it was so different. And the way people are very cautious, and we should all be very cautious to take care of our circles of, people call them bubbles, whatever you want to call them. But you know what? It's opening out more and more. And I think this is a message for us to be able to respect each other and to embrace our differences. We always talk about that in our community, in our culture. To be able to do that, makes you a kind person. It makes you very, very respectful, which is why we've earned that right to be referred to as wisdom keepers, as elders. So we practice that. We've always practiced that way of life, and we still continue to do that. But be very cautious at the same time. When people talk about masks, people about washing their hands. That's good. And we shouldn't, just because this pandemic is upon us right now, that should not prevent us keeping up these practices even after it's safer. Thank you.
Thank you for these comments and for your teachings. I very much respect the terminology that you've taught us here this evening too, that's used in your communities. Thank you. All right, Rosalie, are you ready to share some comments?
Yes.
Thank you.
Well, when I first retired, I would guiltily sit in my sunroom and get this, I'd worry that somebody would phone and ask me, so what are you doing? Could I say nothing? Nothing? Wasn't retirement the time when people said, oh, I'm busier than ever? I, however, had decided that I didn't want to be busier than ever in retirement. Rather, I wanted to be conscious about taking life a little slower, not being rushed, and to be able to stop and, enjoy the moment. That was my retirement resolve. And in addition, a very wise person had told me to take at least 6 months after retirement, before committing to any other things like volunteer positions or part-time jobs, that sort of thing. Now, here was at the beginning of my retirement an opportunity to deeply examine that whole transition from being busy, doing, and then also defining myself by that doing, and instead moving into a being without any kind of career handle to grab onto. And I had read about this transition, and I'd see people grappling with it. I'd done workshops on it. But to go from the theory through to the real lived experience is another thing. And for me, this task of redefining myself goes hand in hand with other inner work. And believe me, there's lots and lots of inner work to do. I don't live in a hut up in a mountain, so that this inner work is done in the context of relationships around me. And this requires unflinching self-candor and self-examination. Some call that navel gazing, call it what you will. This was another opportunity to pay attention to that stuff that I had pushed aside at the time when I was too busy. Or perhaps they were feelings that were difficult to acknowledge, or issues that were just kind of niggling at me. This gave me a time to be more attuned to my physical body's responses to life's experiences. In some ways, that's very much like what the pandemic has done for many of us. It has stopped us to be a little more thoughtful about our life because we had to. In my career as a chaplain in healthcare institutions, in acute care and long-term care, I had accompanied many people who were digging deeper into their inner life, those who were dependent on others for care, and also those who were the caregivers, and many of them also seniors themselves. I observed that there were those people who hung onto their grievances, embittered into death. And then there were others who seemed to find their way through to love and kindness, forgiveness, and compassion. And they were indeed an inspiration to me. They spurred me on to keep working on this awakening process. Now, I've also seen where cognitive decline can loosen the edges and soften hearts and allow love to emerge. I don't recommend that we allow that the weakening cognition be the one that does the work for us. For me also, humor has been a real healing balm in the midst of some pretty heavy tasks sometimes in life. Learning how to laugh at my own foibles, reframing some of my life experiences so I can see them from a little bit of a lighter side. Sometimes it means casting aside any vision I might have of what a woman of my vintage should be like, and just allowing myself to lighten up. Now, retirement and aging is not experienced as golden by all. We've already heard about this. For those of you who read the comics on a daily basis, you may know the comic strip called Pickles. In a recent episode, Grandpa Earl wants to take his grandson Nelson to the park. According to Nelson's mother, though, the boy's schedule is packed full with sports events and music lessons and who knows what. No, he does not have time to go out with his grandpa. In the last panel of the comic strip, we see Earl hunchbacked, head hanging, shuffling off, mumbling to himself. Indeed, it is a picture of how some people experience or fear that they will experience aging. Yes, some seniors do feel pushed aside. They do feel forgotten, rejected, of little worth. Some feel like they're a burden to people around them. They may feel like their life and the wisdom that they've gained over all these years is no longer recognized, and they are no longer offered any opportunities to share this. To date, this has not been my experience. I find now that I enjoy being in a supportive role, just kind of holding the space, being present, walking alongside, participating behind the scenes. In fact, I find that I revel in seeing the younger generation carrying leadership and responsibility, their creativity and their energy. For me, that's a natural transition. And I'm privileged to be at the receiving end. One of the questions that was posed for this discussion circled around what sensibilities we as seniors need from younger folks. Well, it's always tricky to give advice, but let me offer a few observations from my own encounters with others and my own experience. Most of us seniors want and need continued connections with younger people. Really, we do not want to sit and just discuss our maladies, or as one of my friends says, we don't want to be sit there and having organ recitals. We want to hear younger people's perspectives, their ideas, their experiences. In fact, it may even trigger something creative for us. We as seniors, we do want to be recognized as whole persons at all times, but I think this especially is so once we begin to have some difficulties, our senses begin to, call it thinning out, become hard of hearing, perhaps our vision is dim, we may have a much slower response time, may have difficulty comprehending all the things that are going on, may have difficulty navigating what were everyday things in the past, and now they seem just very complex. When that happens, if that happens to me, continue to include me in conversation, continue to include me in visits without the condescension. Now, I want to say too that some of this stuff happens long before we are needing to go to any kind of a care facility. When this happens, listen between the lines. Listen for words that are not spoken. Try to catch the drift of what I'm trying to express when I'm having difficulty expressing things. Okay, you may want to ask if I need help, but if I say not right now, don't be hurt, just ask again and assist in unobtrusive kinds of ways. Or just sit with me. Should I have further disabilities and not be able to interact very much, know that I still have a full range of emotions that I can experience. Now, also, as we get older, we do tend to repeat ourselves, apparently. Yes, we do tend to repeat ourselves. Now, if you are able to listen carefully, you may notice that the stories do change slightly from time to time. Now, by the way, that in itself is not a phenomenon that's related only to seniors. Now, often the storyteller is searching for new meaning or some kind of interpretation for that event that they're talking about. Or maybe they're working towards forgiveness of someone else or themselves, or searching for some kind of sense of self-worth or self-love. Okay, sometimes the repetition has no lofty meaning, really. It's simply that my needle gets stuck and it keeps going back to the same event repeatedly. Well, when that happens to me, kindly lead me to another topic. Well, Walter has already mentioned something about dying and death. For myself, it's very important to discuss dying and death openly now. At present, I'm still able to think and to talk. And my physical and mental health could change in a flash, leaving me with less capacity to talk about these things. Aging so far for me has been a gentle process. I have not been inducted into this chapter of life with debilitating illnesses or limiting life experiences. My partner and I are incredibly grateful for this because, as is well known, health and the support of family and friends and our independence are not to be taken for granted at any age, but especially, I think, once we are in this senior place. My hope is that I can age gracefully, that I can receive help with gratitude once I do need help, and that I can recognize and celebrate the big and the small moments of joy and love open-heartedly. Thanks, Heather.
Thank you, Rosalie. Thank you very much for those thoughtful comments. So we have just under half an hour, about 25 or 20 minutes to talk about some questions that are coming in. One of the first questions, I want to ask Barbara and Clarence about this in particular. I'm wondering, this is sort of a forum for us to hear a little bit more about some of the realities of living as Indigenous persons, but also perhaps in some of the communities, in rural communities for First Nations persons. And I'm wondering what it is that we should know about those realities for seniors living in those situations, in those contexts. I mean, like the environments of those communities. Is there something that we should be aware of as settler people that we maybe haven't heard lately? There you go. Oh, I saw you unmute and then mute again. Oh, try one more time.
Mute?
There you're good.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what was your question again?
I was wondering, what are some of the things that we should know about what's happening in some of the particular rural areas for Indigenous seniors?
Well, I know they're really, you have to realize living on a reserve is completely different from living in the city. Just today, I was watching the news, and there's many, many communities that do not have access to clean drinking water. And that's, and it's a big concern. And they were talking about this one community, like this one family, when the daughter comes to the city, she hauls home jugs and jugs of water because there's no water in the community. They have to really watch their water. Just that simple fact, a simple thing that can be easily fixed is not fixed. And we have to think about people that live in poverty, people that do not have, let's say, an extra pension. We're very fortunate because we worked all our lives. And so we are comfortable, we are okay. And but not everybody has that same privilege. And that's something we always have to be very cautious about, expectations from people in the communities. You can't expect somebody just to hop into their vehicle and come into the city for a visit, because people have to plan. And so that's the difficulties in talking about poverty, talking about access to services, and even in the communities. For instance, if somebody is a diabetic, you're not treated as a priority. There's a lack of education about diabetes. And like we are part of a committee that talks about Diabetes Action Canada, and we're a part of that. So when we became involved with that, we talked about our communities. What can we do for our communities? So we're just in a process of developing a video, and we're going to have four generations, I guess, four groups of people. We have a young family. Their child was born with type 1 diabetes, and she was recently diagnosed with type 2. Then there's this other lady, she has an 18-year-old daughter. And of course, Clarence, being diabetic, and I'm the caregiver. And then we also hope to have one of our Indigenous doctors on that panel. So we're all going to make a statement how it has affected us, whether you're living in a rural area or whether you're living in a city, what impact it has on our daily lives. And, there is a big, difference. If you're living on a reserve, if you're living in the city, there is a big difference in that. And that's something we need to address. And not only us individuals, but the communities have to address that to be able to access services.
Yeah. Just recently, there was a comment made by a community member who happened to be the chief. And he's now in his 30s, early 30s, and their community was finally taking off the boiled water, and he says, I still can't get over that I can do that. Just turn the tap on at the sink, and I can drink that water now. He says, I still have a problem doing that, that he can just go to the tap, turn it on, and drink the water straight out of the tap. Because all his life, ever since he can remember, they have had to boil the water before they could drink it. So it's
meeting these basic needs are some.
That's right.
Those are some of the things we need to be addressing, and that improves the lives of seniors, of course.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for that. All right. Thanks. I'm going to pose this question, which is posed to Gary, but other people can chime in, of course, too. This is from Lawrence and Morden, who is referring to personal care homes that have these pods of living, and how even in a personal care home, there might be multiple levels of care needed. People are not all the same in a personal care home, and what they're able to do is not all the same. And this person was reflecting on visiting in a personal care home where a senior has complained they have no one to visit with since the other seniors in their area or their pod are not as capable of carrying on the same conversation, etc., as this person would be able to do. And they're wondering if you can reflect on the use of pods in personal care homes, and are they less than ideal if people don't have a choice to be in them, is sort of the question posed. you have anything to respond to that?
Yeah, I'm trying to understand what they mean by pod.
I'm guessing they might mean, you know, how in personal care homes you have certain wings or sections.
Okay.
That's my guess.
Yeah, you can't pick your neighbors, even in personal care.
Right.
So if you are on a unit or a wing, you know, you need to learn to get along, and it's not always easy. You know, we don't, you know, necessarily change our personalities as we get older, and we're drawn to some people and not to others. I think, sort of as a tangent of that, I'm very interested and have been very interested for quite a while in the Dutch experience with the Hugewak, which is also known as dementia village, where people live in townhouses and they have universal workers, and they live in a town square kind of setting where there's a shop and a cafe, and you can go buy flowers, you can go to the theater, and that there's interaction both within your communal living group and also with other people in the village. It's a very interesting variation on our more sort of hospital model, PCH in Canada and in Manitoba. And these are very efficient models, hospital, right? Everyone's on the wing, you can do task-oriented things very quickly, but is it best for people who are living in that environment? And is it best for staff and how they get to know and interact with people? So I know there's some interest in people in the province have been looking at that. Also what's called the small group model, small room model, which is very similar. Like you're kind of in a condo with 6 or 8 other people, and you know, you interact that way and your families interact that way. It's very intergenerational. You have your own garden area, you have the playground and that. So I think those things hold a lot of interest for the future. And again, as Walter was saying, are we willing to invest in that?
Thank you, Gary. Yeah, there are other models we can be reaching to. Absolutely. And we know that future of what personal care homes look like might need to be different from what they are now as the next cohort of seniors become seniors. Thanks. Rosalie, there's a question here for you and for anybody else that wants to respond, saying, this is from Dorothy in Winnipeg, asking, do you have any suggestions for seniors who don't have connections with young people within their families? How and where can they connect to young people? If that's such an important thing for us to be doing. Any ideas about that? And this can come from others too. How do we connect to young people if you don't have them within your natural family grouping?
Yeah, that can be very tricky, huh? Especially if you aren't close to families, or if you haven't established those connections early on. I think that does become increasingly difficult to do that. I don't know. Sometimes maybe one has to ride on the tail of friends, you know, who may have connections that could be spread around a little bit more.
Maybe others too have ideas.
Yeah.
I certainly see in our church communities, there's opportunities to connect with younger people through mentorship, just sending a card, letting people know that you're.
Can I make a suggestion?
Please, Barbara, yes.
What I would suggest is this, you know, because, you know, we as seniors or elders, we have a lot of knowledge that we can share. I think one of the best things that a person can do is to volunteer at an organization somewhere. I don't have the time to volunteer anywhere because our community reaches out to us all the time. Just like yesterday, we went and we supervised setting up a teepee. The other day, we were at Assiniboine Park setting up 2 teepees. And then, of course, you know, we do other ceremonies as well. We were at the Human Rights Museum. These people are reaching out to us. These are non-Indigenous people reaching out to us to help them. And so we step up to the plate and then we help them. And that's how you develop those kind of relationships, you know, diverse relationships. And then you can make a connection saying that I'd like to volunteer here and do something. I think that's a good, you know, it's about giving of yourself, giving of your energy, and giving of your wisdom. And that's what it's about. And then in return, there's that self-satisfaction that you've made a difference in somebody's life. Whether you were at one of the, you know, volunteering somewhere to teach, young women how to make quilts, or just as an example. I've seen this happen before with one of the organizations, and it's called Gani Gani, which means
Those that lead.
those that lead. And we did some work there, and they had this older Caucasian lady came, and then she showed the young single moms how to make quilts. And that lady was so happy she was able to make an impact on the lives of these young moms. And she taught them how to make baby blankets and things like that. And then I saw her not too long after that. We were doing a class at the Millennium Library, because we also teach. And she came and joined us. And all of a sudden, you know, we didn't recognize her, but she recognized us. But then I thanked her for working with that organization and saying to her that, you know, that she brought something very valuable to these women. And she really appreciated that. So that's what my recommendation would be, is to volunteer at an organization somewhere. Find somewhere that's close to you. Find somewhere that interests you. You know, and there's a lot of organizations out there, numerous organizations. And like I say, we don't have the time to do that because we're too busy sitting on boards.
You're already doing a lot of that work. Yeah, and as you say, connecting to some of your earlier comments about it also giving you purpose and meaning for yourselves, as well as contributing to others. Yeah, thanks for that. There's another comment that came in with a suggestion about connecting into community groups where there are naturally young people, like connecting with universities and volunteer programs that want to make multi-generational connections. There are those out there. We usually, certainly at CMU, if you ask to be involved, we will probably find you a spot to be involved, for example. Is another question, and this connects to what Rosalie had said earlier too. This is a comment from Lorna in Kitchener, who's saying, she's making a comment here. She's saying that this comment on being versus doing, it said, reminds her of a section of some books written by Al Etmansky about people with disabilities and their contributions to the community, and which is well expressed as gifts, she says. Their contributions to the community as expressed as gifts. I can see that connection to our conversation there with persons with disabilities as having many contributions of being versus maybe doing in the other ways that would be expected. I don't know if someone has a comment toward that, but that was just a comment for us. Other things I'm seeing here. This is a comment around, the conversation we had earlier about, not being able to choose our neighbors in a personal care home, just like we can't other places. And someone saying not feeling like this is okay, that we should have choice in our housing when we're older. And one of the comments here is you don't share a bedroom with your neighbor, right? So that actually gets quite specific in shared room situations in our personal care homes. We have to figure out how to build some choice into that. I don't know if there's any comment on that from any of you. Another question I'm wondering about is, what are the role of faith groups in supporting older adults, seniors? Any thoughts around that? What's the role of our faith groups, of our churches or other faith groups? What should we be reaching to support older adults?
Historically,
go ahead. Walter, were you saying something? And then I can't remember, maybe someone else chimed in too. Walter, go ahead.
Okay. Historically, faith groups have been at the forefront of medical health, all kinds of care. And over time, government took over these services. I think we need to stay involved in in these kinds of services and set vision and direction as to where we want to go with that. It's too easy for institutions, if they are handed over to government or paid agencies, to become warehoused rather than care places. So I think we need to keep involved and to be the visionary for where we want to go with the care of our elders.
Sorry, thank you. Barbara and Clarence, were you about to say something? I can't remember if I saw you.
Yeah, we're just trying to figure this out here.
So, no, I can see you. I can hear you.
Okay. See, this is where our community is really suffering in in what we do as a community of people. We have our gatherings, we have our celebrations, and even the whole idea of losing a family member or a friend, and there's no funeral. And yet, in our tradition, in what we do, there's the 4 days of grieving, and they sing these songs, and the traveling song and the thank you song. They do all that. We have been able to do that. So with some family members we've lost, there has been no closure. You can't even go to a funeral. And that's the challenging part. And yet, it's so important that we acknowledge the lives of those people that walk this earth. And we couldn't even do that. We couldn't even share a meal with them like we would normally do at a gathering, at a funeral or whatever it is. And so that was really missing in our communities. And a lot of times we would phone the families that had a loss, and that was all we could do. And it was a challenge, and it was something that left a void in our. Just today, my eldest daughter and I were talking. She says, "I just can't believe Uncle Francis is gone." Like, just things like that, because we had no closure. And how we're going to do that, I don't know. We lost a lot of community members, relatives through this process, and I too lost my two brothers, and it was. But we did have a funeral for the other one, because this was in Edmonton, so they didn't have a lockdown there yet. But that was the biggest void, I think. Even now, that's what we're dealing with. The surviving families you can't even go to their house to go pay your respects. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's going to be some of the long-term challenges from the pandemic will be, how are we resolving some of that in the future for us? What does it look like to grieve for this extended period of time? And Gary also very much led his conversation around some of that too, was we don't know what the impact is going to be in the next long while among people in personal care home, the staff members who have worked so hard and are tired. As Barbara's saying, people in community who have lost people and are grieving in very different ways than what we've known before. Yeah. Gary, do you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I just want to follow up a little bit about the importance of the faith community, certainly in our personal care home and other personal care homes based on faith. It's fundamental. Our supportive churches like First Mennonite, Sargent, Springfield, and Donwood, they follow their congregation to the personal care home and provide support and visiting and, make them feel still part of the church life. And the spiritual care, as I mentioned, is so important for us. So that connection, I hope it'll continue into the future and for always. And I think it makes us a little bit different. That there is a value set, there's a faith set, and a community that people are still connected to. And it's just so incredibly important for the health and well-being of people who live in our homes.
Okay. Well, our time is winding down. I'm just going to see if there's one last comment I can give. That'll be a shorter one for us. A question from someone in Manitoba. Are there still shared rooms in personal care homes in Manitoba? What is the percentage of shared rooms? I don't know if we have any details about that, but we do know that there are shared rooms, and certainly when they began vaccinations, Gary, this is my understanding, they were certainly aiming for personal care homes with shared rooms because it's much closer accommodation. This person's mentioning that shared rooms in some jurisdictions or some countries are being phased out. And would you say, Gary, that's the same in Manitoba?
I think that would be the long-term plan.
Mm-hmm.
Not having double or quadruple rooms. And I think we learned a bad or difficult lesson in how this disease was so contagious that people in that room, all of them would eventually contract COVID.
So that's one of the challenges to face in providing housing that works for seniors who need that level of care. Okay. All right, we're just going to close out right now. I want to thank each of our panelists this evening, Gary, Walter, Barbara, Clarence, Rosalie. We appreciate your contribution to this conversation. Thanks again to our audience as well. We cannot see you. We know you're out there. We appreciate you taking your time to join us online when we usually have a face-to-face conversation and see you. We appreciate that you've come to us in this way. We hope that this evening is an opportunity for us to get ready or to continue talking about care for older adults in all of our communities and ready to connect with each other to keep these conversations going and start working towards some action where we feel that there should be some action and support each other in that. So thank you again, and good night and be well.